On everybody, my name is Matt Jarbo, and you're watching Real Epic. Now, this is a series I've wanted to do for quite some time, which is where I take a look at a movie, right? Just kind of give an overview of it, talk about who's in it, the story behind it, give a lot, maybe some technical information, and a whole bunch of trivia, and just kind of talk about movies from like what I personally view as being more of like a positive take on it, right? Just more of like hey, let's talk about what's interesting about this movie. Even if the movie itself is bad, there's always got to be something that is interesting and or entertaining about it. But for the first one, I wanted to do something that I think would be universally loved, that I think would be universally hailed as being just one of the best movies ever. And that, of course, is Die Hard. Now, this movie, to me, is the greatest American adventure film or action film of all time. It's 30 years old this month. And you know what? It hasn't been topped yet. Bruce Willis, this is his pivotal role. I mean, it's been 30 years. The dude has been in a number of things since then. But of course, this is one of the ones where he has been known for. This is what he's always been known for. And this movie has a lot going for it, not only in terms of just the type of action, the type of kind of like Detective McClane being a bit of, I don't want to say like an every Joe sort of character, but you can easily put yourself in his shoes if you've ever had like a bad relationship. I mean, ultimately the idea here behind McClane is that this is a guy who kind of hates himself, right? We've seen that level of cynicism poke its head out in some of the sequels, but in the original, this is a dude that kind of hates himself and realizes that when it comes to his failed marriage, it's clearly his fault for the most part. And then, of course, the movie is him trying to make right by that. And that's why it's excellent. So let's take a look here at just the cast, the cast and who they play in this pivotal action role. So first things first, of course, we have Bruce Willis, who is playing John McClane, a streetwise New York cop who has come to Los Angeles to reconcile with his wife. We have Alan Rickman here playing Hans Gruber, a German mastermind and the leader of the terrorists. Although terrorist isn't necessarily the right term you'd want to use for them. They definitely don't like that type of stereotype moniker, but they are definitely thieves, and they are definitely organized, and they are definitely ready to go. Then we got Bonnie Bedilia as Holly Gennaro-McClane, John's estranged wife, one of the executives at Nakatomi Plaza. And, you know, the thing with this is Bonnie Bedilia ended up getting the part because Bruce Willis saw her in another program, I think another movie actually. He really, really liked her, and so he actually campaigned for her to get the role. And that's good because I thought she did a great job in 1 and 2, and sadly we haven't seen her in any of the subsequent 3 films, although many people out there probably wouldn't argue so much with that. Then of course we've got Reginald VelJohnson as Sergeant Al Powell, the man who just wants to get home to his pregnant wife and get some Twinkies along the way. He's gone on record as saying that he hated getting made fun of by his friends after the second movie, because everyone kept asking him basically like when he was going to get Twinkies and stuff. He hated that, which might be one of the reasons why we never saw him pop up in any of the other films. I feel like it wouldn't have really made a lot of sense for him to pop up in Die Hard with a Vengeance, obviously given the fact that it takes place in New York City and not California. His cameo in Die Hard 2 made sense because McClane had transferred out to LA from New York and everything else. So we kind of get a, you know, we never got a lot of Reginald VelJohnson in the role, but it's iconic nonetheless. And that man is a damn hero in my opinion for being as badass as he is. And of course we got Paul Gleason. Now, Gleason here, this guy always plays a bad guy in pretty much every movie he's in. And through the course of this series, I'm sure we will look at a number of films that Paul Gleason is in. He plays Dwayne T. Robinson, the deputy chief of police. Say with me now, the deputy chief of police. This is a guy with a stick shoved so far up his ass that even according to Roger Ebert, was basically the reason why he gave the movie lower score. I'm not even kidding you, but we will cover that here in a little bit. Then, of course, we have Devereux White as Argyle, the limousine driver, who didn't get a lot of love, didn't get a lot of play in the movie overall, but Argyle is, you know, he's a character. People know Argyle People like Argyle, and I think they would have loved to have seen him pop up down the road in another film. Even if it's just a brief cameo. Sometimes those little cameo nods definitely make it so people out there are very happy with what they get. Now we're looking at William Atherton, who plays Richard Thornburg, the arrogant reporter. And Atherton, I 100% love. I've always loved William Atherton simply because this guy never not plays the bad guy, right? We're talking this movie, we're talking Ghostbusters, even Biodome with Pauly Shore is a movie that this guy just knows how to command that presence of being a dick, and people really kind of, I think, respect him for it. The sequel brought him back as kind of a pseudo-antagonist for Bonnie Bedelia's plotline, but even though it wasn't maybe the best use of him, it was still really, really, really good in order to get him back into it. And then also past that, there's Clarence Gilliard as Theo. He's been in like Matlock and Walker, Texas Ranger, and a few other people popped up in there. Robert Davey as one of the FBI agents, Johnson and Johnson, not related. And of course, as I found out, that particular little bit was actually added in there as a way to poke fun at Reginald VelJohnson. So that's why the two FBI agents were named Johnson and Johnson, as a way to kind of poke fun at him. And that to me is pretty freaking cool. That they add that in there a little bit. That they like to make fun of the cast members a bit. They like to kind of joke around a bit. But this, I do want to talk for a second though about the director, because I don't feel when we look back at Die Hard as a whole that we really 100% give a lot of credit to John McTiernan. Now, John McTiernan has directed a number of movies that you love. He's Predator, Die Hard with a Vengeance, 13th Warrior, The Hunt for Red October. The bad thing is, though, we haven't heard much out of him in the last couple of years, and you figure Hollywood would be wanting someone like McTiernan to come back, McTiernan to come around and direct more of these films that are iconic, that are known, that are loved. I totally also left out of this one Last Action Hero, which is another fun movie that we'll take a look at on this program. But the problem with McTiernan is he got himself into a bit of legal trouble. He back in 2000, he hired a private investigator to basically spy on one of his producing partners for the film Rollerball. And he ended up getting in a lot of trouble and ended up basically serving. He pled guilty and he served 10 months in jail and then got out. Spent the last 2 months under house arrest at his home in Wyoming. And of course, this had to do quite a bit actually with Samuel Jackson and Alec Baldwin and Brad Bird, even the director of The Incredibles, coming out on Facebook and social media and pushing the free John McTiernan hashtag in order to run the campaign to help get this guy out of jail. And he's been out now for a couple years. He's been off probation officially in 2014. And yeah, Hollywood won't touch him. And well, here's the thing, as we're coming up to like the 30th anniversary of this movie, and Predator from 1987, and Die Hard 3 from 1993, and Hunt for Red October, I think 1991, Last Action Hero, I think 94 on that one, 13th Warrior, 98, I want to say, maybe 96, 98, somewhere, it doesn't really matter. The point is, McTiernan is a fantastic action adventure director, and in this day and age, I don't know why people have not gone up and just jumped on this dude to direct other stuff, right? It would make the most sense in the world right now for it to direct other stuff. And unfortunately, this is where we are. We're waiting at this point now for Hollywood to give McTiernan a go. But I do want to jump over and talk about the screenwriter here. Now, this is a guy that you should really know about. His name is Steven de Souza, and he and this is the thing here. It says, among a handful of screenwriters whose films have earned over $2 billion at the box office, Steven de Souza was introduced to Hollywood on camera as a consultant on the LA Game Show, or contestant on the LA Game Show. And then he's gone on to do a bunch of other stuff here. And the guy's been around for years. He's a pro. Not everything he's done is probably going to be up to your speed, but I guarantee you would have at least seen one, if not multiple, of this guy's films. Because looking over here at his writing on IMDb, going down all the way to 1973, see it here down at the bottom. You can see he started on Arnold's Wrecking Company, worked up to the Bionic Woman, to the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew mysteries. He wrote a couple episodes for Knight Rider. He wrote an episode of V, but his first real big feature film was 48 Hours from 1982. Eddie Murphy, Nick Nolte, excellent action adventure film. He also then wrote the story for Commando, which is so crazy because Commando is, again, an excellent film. You have Jumping Jack Flash, which is another fun movie. Whoopi Goldberg, I think outside of Sister Act, Whoopi Goldberg did the best in Jumping Jack Flash. Then you've got The Running Man, which if you can kind of see that he does well working with over the top concepts and in Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so I feel like looking at The Running Man, which is a movie I definitely want to touch on in this particular series, it's great. It's infinitely quotable. Same with Die Hard to a certain extent. So this guy knows how to write things that are very much going to capture your attention. He did Die Hard. He did another 48 Hours. He did Die Hard 2, which arguably wasn't as good as the first Die Hard, but let's be fair. I mean, sequels rarely ever match up to the original. He wrote K-9000 in 1991. He did Hudson Hawk, which if you've ever seen Hudson Hawk, you know that movie is weird, but it's definitely a fun, kitschy Bruce Willis film, and he spends a lot of time working with him. He also wrote The Flintstones, Beverly Hills Cop 3, and Street Fighter. Yeah, the 1994 Jean-Claude Van Damme utter clusterfuck of a film, Street Fighter, which is in one of my it's such a fun camp movie in my opinion that I love it. I love it to hell and back. Then he also did Judge Dredd. He wrote the screenplay for Judge Dredd. You can love him or hate him for that one. And then after that, it gets a little bit kind of weird because he did Knockoff. And Knockoff is a movie with and it's kind of funny that Judge Dredd and Knockoff both kind of feature Rob Schneider in a comedic side character role here. But Knockoff is a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie about knockoff jeans, if I recall correctly. And then, of course, he did really, I would say the last big movie he wrote was Lara Croft Tomb Raider and the Cradle of Life, which ultimately was actually a really solidly fun film and one that I liked quite a bit. So hopefully that one, you get an idea for just kind of who Steven de Souza is and get an idea for just what kind of stuff he's created. Now, one of the things I want to do after kind of going through the characters and who wrote it, let's take a look here at the synopsis here. See if I could get my thing right. Because I like to bring up the synopsis because people who don't fully know what it is. We'll view the synopsis and then we'll view the trailer. So it says NYPD cop John McClane goes on a Christmas vacation to visit his wife Holly in Los Angeles, where she works for the Nakatomi Corporation. While they are at the Nakatomi headquarters for Christmas party, a group of robbers led by Hans Gruber takes control of the building and holds everyone hostage, with the exception of John, while they plan to perform a lucrative heist. Unable to escape and with no immediate police response, John is forced to take the matters into his own hands. And that's just freaking cool, man. That just sounds awesome, right? Like, that is awesome. I mean, if you read that like right off the bat, you'd be interested. But just take a look here at the trailer to give you an idea for how this thing has held up over the years.
It's Christmas Eve in L.A.
California.
Is Daddy coming home soon?
Well, we'll see what Santa and Mommy can do, okay?
A New York cop, John McClane, has come to see his wife.
I missed you.
Instead, he's going to have to save her.
Sit down.
Within this skyscraper high above the city, 12 terrorists have declared war.
They're about to be taught a lesson in the real use of power.
They're as brilliant
Because I am interested in the $640 million in your vault.
as they are ruthless.
But I'm telling you, you're just gonna have to kill me. Okay. We'll do it the hard way.
Now, he's the last thing McClane wants
Think, David, think.
is to be a hero. Within this skyscraper, but he doesn't have a choice. 12 terrorists have declared war.
They're about to be taught a lesson in the real.
They have already killed one hostage.
This channel is reserved for emergency calls only.
Lady, do I sound like I'm ordering a pizza?
He's inside? Who is he? Who are you then? You are most troublesome for a security guard.
Sorry. double jeopardy.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, sadistic cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
But you just destroyed a building. And I am in charge of this situation.
Well, I got some bad news for you. Come up here, then look like you're in charge of Jack.
He is alone, he is tired, and he hasn't seen diddly squat from anybody down here.
Hey, pal, how you feeling?
All things being equal, I'd rather be in Philadelphia.
And you have it.
Only John can drive somebody that crazy.
He's an easy guy to like
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
and a hard man to kill. Bruce Willis, Die Hard.
Got invited to the Christmas party by mistake. Who knew?
Isn't that great? Isn't that just still excellent to this day, right? To this day, 30 years later, that trailer still absolutely positively holds up in regards of just how awesome it is, right? You hear the dialogue, and it does sound quite a bit like an exploitation film, like an old grindhouse film with the narrator voice, but it feels very much in line with what exactly they wanted to do with the movie, how they wanted to portray it, right? Now, the movie itself came out on July 15th, 1988. So worldwide, July 15th. And I mean, that was just 2 weeks ago, and it grossed actually it did pretty well, actually. It did very well in terms of its response, not only domestically, but internationally. Now, the movie had a budget of only $28 million, which it does feel like that is quite a bit of money for the 1980s. But back then, you have to understand, like, Hollywood had bank. And they were willing to spend it. $5 million of the budget for this movie was just to pay Bruce Willis, and I will talk a bit about that more when we get into the trivia section. But that goes to show you that, like, they were willing to spend out the money. Now, it grossed around $83 million domestically over the course of its run, and it grossed another $57 million internationally, giving it a total worldwide cumulative turn of about $140 million, just around that, which, if you were going to equate for inflation, would actually put it up to about $299,072,000, if the inflation calculator I looked at was correct. That, based on the small budget that it got, is a bona fide hit. It is a bona fide success, which goes to show you exactly why we ended up getting the sequels that we did. Although I could argue that A Good Day to Die Hard probably wouldn't really be considered the best thing ever, right? But the thing is, the movie made money. It got a lot of good reviews. A lot of people really liked it. In fact, the critical reception is the next thing I want to talk about here. That actually did pretty well, because when it came out, like, even Mark Kermode basically calls it Cowboys and Indians meets the Towering Inferno, which is interesting because that's actually one of the bases for the original story from Robert Thorpe in his novel Nothing Lasts Forever, which, again, we will talk about that in the trivia section. It all kind of rolls together given how awesome this particular film is. But Roger Ebert was not a giant fan of the movie. He wasn't a giant fan at all. Roger Ebert actually ended up giving it a negative review, giving it 2 stars, and basically said that it was Paul Gleason's fault, because the way that the character acted undermined the second half of the movie. But I did want to take a quick look here at the Rotten Tomato score. So what we got here is we got the Rotten Tomato page up, and you can see that it's sitting at a 93% fresh rating and an audience score of about 94%. And I still want to know why this isn't at 100, to be honest with you. A movie like Die Hard deserves to be at 100. This is, but again, only 71 reviews, 66 were fresh, and 5 are rotten. But if you take a look over here, because this is such an old thing and this is an aggregate website, you can see here that just looking at the top reviews, Roger Ebert called it inappropriate and wrong-headed interruptions reveal the fragile nature of the plot and prevent it from working. You know what? Rest in peace, Roger Ebert, but I completely disagree. Richard Schickel of Time Magazine. Again, another top critic, but negative review. In the first half of director John McTiernan's movie, Willis wears an undershirt. In the second half, he gets rid of it, and that's pretty much it for his performance. I'm gonna have to completely disagree with that one. And then this one here, the mean ones are interesting to read because you can almost disagree with all of them here. David Sterrett from Christian Science Monitor, as if they're going to be the #1 arbiter for what is badass in America, says most of the action is run-of-the-mill Hollywood blood and thunder, but a couple of scenes are unusually reprehensible. Like what? Hal Hinston from Washington Post says, gets your heart pounding, then makes you hate yourself for it. And yeah, okay, these are the reasons why the movie's got only a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I don't think anyone else out there is gonna 100%. I don't know. This movie, 30 years, has been able to hold itself up pretty damn well, and I'm definitely on board for it sticking around for quite some time. I mean, this is a movie that I have an 8-month-old daughter, and when she gets old enough, I want this to be a Christmas tradition. Not right away, but Die Hard is such an integral part of our society in regards to pop culture. I mean, how many movies have emulated it? How many films have been known as Die Hard in a what, right? Like, look at Under Siege, Die Hard on a cruise ship. Under Siege 2, Die Hard in a train. Speed, surprisingly, Die Hard on a bus. Wesley Snipes, Die Hard in a plane. So many of these other movies have very much played into that particular trope, one that Bruce Willis really set the line for. He set the bar at. And even its own sequels weren't able to live up to the original, with the exception, I would say, of Die Hard with a Vengeance. Die Hard with a Vengeance, for me, is a fantastic movie. I thought that they came back. They really brought it. The Samuel L. Jackson as the sidekick was a great addition, and the movie itself was just fantastically made. And I think that it lives up to what Die Hard was going to be. But I did want to touch a little bit here on some trivia, because I thought trivia would be fun to discuss here. And I don't really have any assets for this, so we're just going to go through a bunch of these trivia bits that are here. It says here that the script was offered actually to a number of action stars. Keep in mind, this was in the mid-1980s. This is in the mid-1980s, and Fox wanted to have a hit on their hands. They wanted to have a summer hit. So they talked to Sylvester Stallone, Harrison Ford, Richard Gere, Burt Reynolds, Robert De Niro, and Don Johnson, all of whom turned it down. Yeah, and I bet you all of whom right now are being like, God damn it. Well, maybe not Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford probably was like, look, man, I'm already Indiana Jones and Han Solo. All right, I think around that time he was working on Patriot games or whatever, so he probably didn't want to assign himself to another genre or a trilogy of films. But Stallone, I would argue, probably is feeling the heat on that one. Even with Rocky and Rambo, something about Die Hard is just amazing. And surprised it never really went to Arnold Schwarzenegger, considering Steven D'Souza having worked on The Running Man and Commando. And, well, we'll talk a bit more about that here in a hot second. Bruce Willis, when I mentioned before, was paid $5 million for the role, which at the time was virtually unheard of outside of top-tier A-list talent like Warren Beatty and, a few other big people whose names I cannot think of right now. I mean, like Al Pacino, those kind of guys. They were the ones that were going to be pulling in the $5 million. And the reason why, again, this was kind of unheard of was the only other movie. He'd been in 2 movies prior. But Blind Date from the year before this one came out was a moderate success. It wasn't a well-received movie. It was Bruce Willis's first starring role. Kim Basinger was in it. Phil Hartman was in it. The movie's got a good cast, but ultimately kind of You don't really think about Bruce Willis as being in Blind Date as his first movie. You kind of think that Die Hard is the first movie where it kind of puts him on the screen. And he also had the moderate, it was, I think, doing pretty well at the time with Moonlighting was a couple years in. By the time that they got around to making this movie, and he was actually dual shooting both Moonlighting and Die Hard, which surprisingly actually led to a lot more character development with other actors because they were trying to juggle Bruce Willis's schedule. McTiernan actually focused more on other characters, allowing those actors to play the role a little bit better, which is it worked out wonderful because we all know Ellis, we all know Holly Gennaro, we all know Nakatomi, you know, we all know these side characters that are in this movie. Argyle, that even though they're small side characters, they ultimately work out really, really, really well for just what they're trying to go for here. But the thing was, though, the $5 million needed to be approved, and it was approved by Rupert Murdoch himself, who believed in Bruce Willis. Interestingly enough, the Nakatomi Tower itself is actually the Fox Tower. So if you go to LA and you see Nakatomi Plaza, it's actually the Fox's headquarters. It's a 20th Century Fox building. The company charged the movie rent in order to be able to shoot there. But you know what? Hey, I think it works out just fine. It's also, I think, a tax write-off. You should have been a tax write-off, right? Now, interestingly enough, the elevator scene is one that comes up quite often. Every single Die Hard movie has a scene that involves an elevator. It's kind of a running trope with it. But this particular one, where McClane falls down the shaft and fails to grab the side or almost misses a side, was actually a mistake by the stuntman, who was supposed to grab the first vent as it was originally planned. He slipped and continued to fall, but the shot was used anyway. It was edited together with one where McClane grabs the next vent down as he falls. So it's one of those little flubs where he falls and he misses it and he gets the next one. So it's meant to kind of create that tension with the viewer. That was a mistake by the stuntman, but the editor's like, they're not going to know. They're not going to know. They're not going to know any of this stuff. They're not going to know any of these things. Now the scene where, this is interesting too, the scene where Hans Gruber and McClane meet for the very first time was actually inserted into the script after Alan Rickman was found to be proficient at mimicking an American accent. John McTiernan and the producers had been looking for a way to kind of bring the two characters together prior to meeting for the climax, and they capitalized on this particular talent that Rickman had, and the scene was actually unrehearsed in order to generate a greater feeling of spontaneity between the two actors, and that scene worked out really, really well. Like, we as the audience, we know what Hans Gruber is up to. We as the audience, we are aware what he's there doing. We know that he's got a gun. We know that he could kill John McClane because he had killed, Ellis. We know that what he could do, but the way that Bruce Willis played it was just kind of like, oh, you're, like he's a detective. He's a New York detective, so we can kind of pick up on it. But he played the part really well until right then with no bullets in the gun. It was great. That scene was fantastic. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the movie, and I love the fact that it was one of those last minute improvisations. Now, when I'd mentioned before about the Nothing Lasts Forever, that one is actually really interesting because of what it ultimately is. And what it is here, it's a book. So the book is Nothing Lasts Forever, and it's a 1979 thriller by Roderick Thorpe, and it's a sequel to his 1966 novel, The Detective. The novel is mostly known through its film adaptation, which is Die Hard. The original plot for it, though, and this is where it's interesting, you can see what they pulled from, and you can see what they ultimately cut off. It says here, a retired New York police detective, Joe Leland, is visiting the 40-story office headquarters of the Klaxon Oil Corporation in Los Angeles on Christmas Eve, where his daughter, Stephanie Leland Gennaro, works. While he was waiting for his daughter's Christmas party to end, a group of German autumn-era terrorists take over the skyscraper. The gang is led by brutal Anton Little Tony the Red Gruber. Joe had known about Gruber through a counterterrorism conference he attended years prior. Barefoot, Leland slips away and manages to remain undetected in the gigantic office complex. Aided outside only by a Los Angeles police sergeant, Al Powell, and armed with only his police-issue Browning high-power pistol, Leland fights off the terrorists one by one in an attempt to save the 74 hostages, including his daughter and grandchildren. The terrorists plan to steal documents that will only publicly expose Klaxon Corporation's dealings with Chile's junta. They also intend to deprive Klaxon of the proceeds of the corrupt deal by dumping $6 million in cash out of the tower's windows. Leland not only believes their claims, but also that his daughter is involved. And that's just the movie. Like, that's the book, Nothing Lasts Forever. And that's what they were going for that one. You could seriously see what Stephen D'Souza was pulling from when they really wanted to try to adapt this, right? So the old movie The Detective stars Frank Sinatra back from 1960s, right? And they'd offered him this role originally. They were going to do this movie, this story. By the time he was in his late 70s, and he just couldn't do it. And actually, Clint Eastwood ended up getting his hands on the rights, and he was going to make this movie, and he was going to star as the main character in the early 1980s, but that ended up falling through. And look, as much as I'm a Clint Eastwood fan, and I clearly am a Clint Eastwood fan, I'm very, very, very glad that that none of that happened. Right, that none of that happened. Now, what I mentioned earlier about the connection to Commando being Stephen D'Souza, one of the it's kind of an internet rumor, one that gets floated around in certain groups, but I guess it's not true, is that this movie was actually being written originally as a sequel to Commando, and Stephen D'Souza has actually denied that. But he says that he actually wrote the script as if Hans Gruber was the protagonist, and the reason why he said that was because he likes to look at it from the villain's perspective. He likes to look at it from the villain's narrative, the villain's point of view, because oftentimes what the villain is doing is what drives the story, right? The hero is the one who's trying to thwart the villain's plans. The villain knows his and where he's going, where he's beginning, and where he's ending. At least that's the plan. And here comes this kind of screw in the system, and a clog in the pipes, if you will. And that's, if you look at Die Hard from being the story of Hans Gruber getting completely fucked over by John McClane, and actually becomes a whole different viewpoint, which I really, really, really like. I think the thing works out really well. Now, additionally, and this is interesting when it comes to the script, is McTiernan didn't want the villains to be terrorists, right? Because that was kind of part of it too, is they were playing up the terrorist game when really they were just bank robbers. Right, that's what they are. He said that making them terrorists would be kind of like making them too mean. They were mean, you wanted them to die, but you also wanted to not hate them entirely, right? A good villain is one you love to hate, but it's also one that is not so out there that you just kind of lose all maybe empathy for or understanding of. You can understand Hans Gruber's motivations and why he was doing what he was doing, causing the confusion by trying to get the Asian Dawn, let out of jail. And it's like, I don't know who they are. I read about them in Time, right? Now he says here that he wanted to do away with politics in favor of making them thieves in pursuit of monetary gain, believing it would make the film more suitable for summer entertainment. But let's be fair, this was conceived of and produced and shot during the 80s, right? So it's like, yes, it might be designed for summer entertainment, but it also, the capitalism part of it, the stocks play of it, to me, it says that this was very much modeled after the way that, the capitalist nature of the 80s. That's how I view it, right? And I was born in 82, so I clearly grew up watching G.I. Joe and Ninja Turtles when I was a kid, and not so much dealing with that type of stuff. But looking back now, you can see where that's a thing. Interestingly, also, is in the original script, they wanted this to take place over 3 days. Rather than just one night, but McTiernan decided to make that call, and that works out well. Why would if he was going to be in there for 3 days, he would be malnourished. It would just, there's so much more time that you'd have to kind of stretch out. Argyle would be trapped in the basement for 3 days with whatever cokes he had in the back of the limousine or something. Working well, one night works pretty well. It works out really well because it's kind of a clean in, maybe not a clean out, a dirty out actually, but it causes enough confusion to where the police don't have time to absolutely mobilize, even though they brought in the FBI and the SWAT team, and they both screwed the pooch both times because, well, Gruber is Gruber, and Gruber was waiting. And then also, this is an interesting one too, because this was Rickman's first film, right? This was Alan Rickman's first movie, and for his he almost didn't want to take it because he had just got to L.A. and he didn't want to be the villain, but he got persuaded to take it. And actually, interestingly enough, for his death scene, They messed with him too, because he actually was dropped about 70 feet on a green screen set, and the shot that they used was actually the very first time he did it, because they dropped him early. So that look of, oh no, is actually him freaking out because they dropped him early, and it's actual fear in his face. So that was a genuine reaction from Alan Rickman. And then additionally too, in the scene with Ellis, when he's trying to schmooze up Gruber, and he goes like, Hans, Bobby, and the look on Rickman's face is very okay. We don't know each other that well, to us it looks like Ellis is just playing up that role, but in reality, the actor ad-libbed that, and that was Rickman's like natural response was, oh, okay. Yeah, that was kind of crazy. And it really does make you, for one, appreciate Alan Rickman as an actor. It put him on the map. We got so many great roles out of him. It's a shame that he passed away a couple years ago. The world of entertainment, I believe, is lesser as a result. Hans Gruber is one of the most iconic villains in any movie ever, in any piece of literature ever, and his depiction of the role is absolutely timeless. Same with John McClane. And the way that Bruce Willis portrayed him, even though as time went on and McClane became more bitter and more cynical, at least that's the way that they wrote him, which does kind of make sense as like, why does this keep happening sort of thing. We still get this movie where it's about a guy who's got a failed marriage, and, he realizes that he's the bad guy in it. He's the one who screwed up, and the movie is spent with him essentially hating himself for how he's approached things, as well as trying to win back his wife. And in the end, he does, and then, it doesn't last forever. As these sort of things tend to not do. But ultimately, that's kind of where we find ourselves with Die Hard. There's a lot more trivia to go through. I picked what I felt was the most relevant stuff. Again, 30 years of this movie, 30 years of this franchise, and we can see why people love it. You can sit there and you can see why people hail this as the best Christmas movie of all time, even though Bruce Willis has tried. And tonight, the recording of this, was the Bruce Willis roast in Comedy Central, where he tried to claim that Die Hard was not, in fact, a Christmas movie, that it was a good goddamn Bruce Willis movie, is true. But Stephen D'Souza on Twitter last year, towards the end of last year, actually came out and 100% confirmed that this is a Christmas movie, that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. And let's face it, Die Hard is one that you watch every year, I watch every year, and it's a tradition that I think we need to keep going, and it's one that I'm totally happy to keep doing. Anyway, this wraps up Die Hard for Real Epic. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please leave your comments below. If you have any movies you'd like me to look into, any movies you'd like to see me cover, let me know down in the comments below on that one as well. I do want to eventually turn this into a bit of a live streaming thing as well. So I'm working on the format, always working on the format, and then bring people in to discuss it as we go through, so we can have this big, lively conversation about movies that we love. Even if they're bad, we can always find something cool to talk about. And I think that stands true for basically any movie, from something as excellent as Die Hard to something as horrible as Twilight. We could probably find something there worth discussing. And that, of course, is the whole point here on 3 Buck Theater and here with Real Epic. And I will talk to you guys later. Have yourself a fantastic day, and peace out.